And
Can send them.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atlanta Press Club. My name is Christy Wooten, and I'm the president of the club. Thank you for joining us today for our check-in series event, Radio, the Secret History of WRAS. Today, we are hosting current and former staff and alumni of Georgia State University's radio station, WRAS-FM, also known as Album 88, to discuss the station's 50th anniversary. We will also hear from journalists Andreas Preuss and Chad Radford about the cultural impact of the station. Thanks to our audience today for supporting the work of the Atlanta Press Club by attending this event. Would like to remind you that if you've got questions for our moderator or speakers today, please type them into the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can visit atlantapressclub.org to register for future events or to donate to the club. We are a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization. Thank you also to our annual sponsors for your support. All right, let's get started. Today we've asked Rodney Ho to moderate the program. Rodney is the entertainment reporter at the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Rodney is a Princeton grad who has worked for the Wall Street Journal and has been at the AJC for what now, Rodney, a total of more than 20 years?
Too long, right?
Rodney writes about radio, TV, film, and comedy for the paper's print and online editions, and he has covered WRAS many times in the past. Welcome, Rodney.
Thank you, Christy, for having me. I'm a total radio geek, so I am totally geeked out for this session, and I'd like to introduce our panel. First, let's welcome Andreas Preuss. Andreas is a former longtime supervising producer at CNN who went back to school in 2017 to pursue his master's degree at GSU. He probably knows more about WRAS than any human being on earth, so congratulations and welcome, Andreas.
Thank you.
We're also pleased to have Chad Radford. He is a digital editor for Atlanta In Town and writes the Rough Draft newsletter. He's a freelance writer, former longtime music editor at Creative Loafing. He also knows RAS very well. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this.
And we've got Bryce McNeil. He received his doctorate of philosophy and communication from GSU and has served as the college's director for student media since August 2008. He manages and provides counsel for the leaders of all 5 student media outlets there. He serves as the secretary for the College Media Association, treasurer for the Southeast Journalism Conference. Welcome, Bryce.
Good to be here. Just one quick clarification.
Yes.
I'm no longer secretary of the College Media Association. My term.
Oh, tragic.
Other than that, thank you for that sparkling introduction.
Okay, and now we've got Fiona Bloom. She's a well-known music publicist who owns a marketing, PR, and branding company called The Bloom Effect, representing all styles of music. Before Fiona earned her degree at GSU in 1992, she was a classically trained concert pianist and violinist. At GSU, she hosted All That Jazz at RAS. After college, she went on to work for record labels, built her own company where she discovered MF Doom, and now works with artists such as Simple Minds and the Zombies. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. I guess I'm the only one that actually left Atlanta. I'm in New York, but my heart is always there. So.
And I hope we've had some tech problems with Talib Shabazz. I hope you're there. He is a DJ and music industry professional who's worked in AV, music licensing, sound, music composition, live events, and social media. While at GSU in the early 90s, Talib was one of the original DJs working on Rhythm and Vibes, Atlanta's longest running hip hop show. Hey, Talib, are you there? Maybe, maybe not. Hopefully he'll come in soon. Before we get to the discussion,
I'm here. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm here.
You're here.
I'm
Yay.
sorry. Yeah, I just had it muted. I'm sorry. I feel like a novice. I feel like such a novice.
You're on the
You're in
move
a car
too.
too. All right. Well, one of the reasons for the Atlanta Press Club doing this program today is that we're nearing 100 years of commercial radio in Georgia. Next year will mark 100 years of WSB, and GSU is celebrating 50 years of WRAS. Well, right now, we'll first speak with Andreas Preuss about the project he's been working on as a student at GSU. Andreas, you worked at CNN for many years. Tell us about going back to school and becoming interested in the history of this particular radio station.
Well, thank you for having me at the Atlanta Press Club. I've been a member for a long time. And also, I always thought I'd be speaking at the Press Club about TV news. And here I am speaking about college radio, which I think is great. I spent 30 plus years in TV news, 10 years in New Orleans, 23 years at CNN as a supervising producer. I love international news. I've covered the biggest events of the last 30 years, which is quite a privilege, especially working for a great company like CNN. I recently took a buyout, and that allowed me to go back to school. And I was actually, when I was at CNN, I was taking one class a semester at GSU history, the history department. So, when I retired, quote unquote, I could focus more on, my studies. And that also allowed me as a full-time student to work at WRAS. And some background, I went to Loyola University in New Orleans, which was right next to Tulane University. And Loyola had a closed circuit AM channel because the Catholic Church in New Orleans already owned an AM, FM, and TV station. So the students were relegated to a closed circuit AM. But they, fortunately, we could work at WTOL, which, similar to WRAS, was a Southeast powerhouse in the 80s. And I love college radio. Also worked at a shortwave station in New Orleans, and WRNO, which was your classic rock station in New Orleans. But I decided to go into television news. And after 30 plus years, I thought, well, here I am back again, back to my roots. Also, my wife worked at WRVU in Vanderbilt. And that was one of our first connections when we were dating. It was that college radio thing. And that's a fascinating thing when you talk to the alums. But yep, I was in the station, and I was, holding the records that these folks played in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, playing these again on college radio, just fascinated by holding these really historic artifacts, the original records that were played with the notes written on it and the cut sheets. And I thought, I wanted to do some big-headed, research project on the Berlin Wall and memory and all that stuff. And I thought, what, college radio is an understudied field, really, in academia. There's just a few books about it and not much archival research out there. So I thought, here's an opportunity. Fortunately, Georgia State has a very nice archive of WRAS, tons of paperwork, some digital media, records, cassettes, things like that. So I had a treasure trove of archival material to get into. So really that brought me to the research project, which I am now concluding after speaking to 80 plus alumni from WRAS, all phone interviews as part of an oral history project that I will also donate to the library, to the GSU library. It's been fascinating to me, because one alum says, well, you ought to talk to her, or you ought to talk to him. I spoke to Fiona Bloom. I spoke to Talib Shabazz, who actually has the best laugh in Atlanta when you hear it, right? Talib, it's great to see you. I've only met a few in person. Jeff Walker, who was one of my mentors in this project, worked for the station for 45 plus years. Gail
what
Harris.
makes Jeff Walker famous?
Jeff Walker made basically a career out of college radio. Not many people have done that in the industry. And I'm looking, at first it was like, people like, what was my favorite song? What was your favorite memory? But as a historian, it's that critical look. So focusing on race, gender and sexuality, economy, which I call college radio industry, and then memory, what were people's memories, and putting this all into a critical look into WRAS is what's fascinating to me as a historian and also as a journalist, because, I could ask certain questions. And also, look, I work at the station. So I also have a personal connection to WRAS, which I think also opened the door to a lot of the alums because they knew that I knew where they were coming from, and they knew where I was coming from, because we do have this connection with the radio station.
Wonderful. Well, the station, like I said, 50 years. So let's go back to the early days of FM, 1971. That was kind of a transitional time for radio because AM was dominant at the time, right? And having an FM signal was kind of new territory for everybody, even on the commercial side.
Yeah, and you really can't talk about the beginning of WRAS without speaking about WPLO. WPLO had an AM station which played country music, and their FM station, well, back in the 60s, a lot of that content would play, they just simulcast. But then the FCC passed certain laws where you can't simulcast more than 20% of your content on an FM station. So here they had an FM station in Atlanta the Plow Corporation owned WPLO, and they basically, they made Bayer aspirin. That was their kind of claim to fame. So this is owned by kind of multinational corporation, and they had stations in Memphis and also Baltimore. But they basically came to an arrangement with Georgia State, which was called Georgia State College at the time in the mid 60s, to basically lend WPLO FM to the students of Georgia State to get credit for public service, which was a FCC, in the interest of public service, that they could get credit for this by loaning the station to the students. Well, as things happen in college radio industry, as you just said, Rodney, AM was beginning to not decline, but Plow saw that their stations in Memphis and Baltimore were starting to make money by being commercial and playing commercials and stuff like that. So of course, PLO FM in Atlanta was a non-commercial educational station. They couldn't play commercials because they were, being run by the students. They were getting that public service credit. So the Plow Corporation basically said, you know what? We're going to flip this to a commercial station. Georgia State students, thank you, but we're good. We're splitting. They left campus because the studios were actually on campus. So that actually, that Plow Corporation decision spurred the students at Georgia State to found their own radio station, which was WRAS, which came on the air on January 18, 1971.
Yeah, how did they even get the signal? Did the university or the college at the time pay for the signal, or?
Well, PLO was on 103.3. So of course, when the university, because that was a commercial FM signal, right. A non-commercial is between 88 and 92, left of the dial, the low end of the dial.
Right. So how did they get 88.5? How did they even get that?
Well, they applied for the permit, the FCC license. They were given that channel. And then also, they had several. They wanted WGSU. That didn't happen. They wanted several other names. They finally came up with WRAS, which is Radio at State, which is what.
Yeah, not the greatest acronym, but I don't think anybody knows the acronym, right? That's kind of mysterious. But RAS rolls off the tongue, right? It's not a bad,
No, and then RAS. People say RAS.
Correct.
And then, of course, the Album 88 logo came up in the early 80s as a way to differentiate itself from the commercial stations, because 96 Rock, that was, an iconic station in the mid 70s that kind of came up. They flipped their format. People in Atlanta remember the 96 Rock sticker, right? It was on the back of every car. And that, Album 88 was also a logo that the college station had to come up with to once again differentiate itself from that commercial stations. Of course, you had WREK, the Georgia Tech station, which started right before RAS. You had WCLK, the Clark Atlanta station, which started a little bit after.
Jazz. Yeah, it's now Jazz station still, yeah.
Yep, still Jazz. And they started a little bit after RAS, and they had WRFG, Radio Free Georgia, which these stations are all clumped. They're all clumped together right there between 88 and 92. So there was also, when they did the ratings, people got confused. It was a W something, and they're on the low end of the dial. So they really had to come up with that Album 88 logo to once again, like I said, differentiate themselves from the rest of the stations.
Gotcha. Well, it is 50 years. We're gonna go a little bit decade by decade here. Can you give us a quick sentence about each decade at the station and what defined it before we dive deep with the panel? What's kind of your take on each decade? Like, what was the first decade like, the 70s?
Well, the 70s, as I just said, the founding of RAS, January 1971. They started with the top 40 format.
Really?
That quickly, yeah. It was, they were like, I was listening to an interview yesterday with the guy, Carl Hayward, who was one of the first African-American DJs on RAS. He started a program called African Vibrations in 1972. Can you imagine a program on radio in 1972 that featured African-American music, talk, politics? I mean, this is a pretty groundbreaking program.
That is.
And he told me that, and he also came from WPLO, so he had professional radio experience, that there were two groups. There were the straight-laced crew cut kids, the frat people, as he called them. And then you had the progressive rock hippie people that he was part of, right? You can imagine the early 70s,
a lot of class,
hair.
Yes.
It's an old college trope, you know, the straight-laced people versus the freaks and the geeks,
The rebels, yes.
But the music, top 40 was, you could find that anywhere. Quixie and other stations were already playing that. So it was also that iconic, classic rock, Led Zeppelin, The Who, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, Genesis, all these groups were coming up. Like I said, WKLS flipped their format from beautiful music, which was basically elevator music, in 1974 to become 96 rock. And, they kind of brass went a little bit deeper cuts. They didn't play the hits off the records. And that would be a formula you would often see repeated throughout the decades. Once the station kind of co-opted the format, they would play deeper cuts.
Right.
You also had, the Garretson, which in 1979, a general manager came in, wanted to change it more back to kind of top 40 or commercial, what he called music that's more accepting to the Georgia State community. And he either fired or people quit in revolt that basically shut the station down for 4 days to get, he'd have nobody to run the place. They came to an agreement. This is also the rise of punk and new wave, which, let's face it, scared a lot of people. The Sex Pistols, their first show in the U.S. was in the late 70s. That music,
they came to Atlanta too, didn't they?
That was their first concert, right, at the Great Southeast Music Hall. That scared the heck out of people. That music was just So that was the 70s. As I said, in the 80s. Jeff Walker became the general manager. He determined with his music director through data that the average Georgia State student would be a 27-year-old female. It's a little surprising that you would target demo that specific person, because you think of college rock. I mean, look, that's not my music. It's a little bit softer edged. Groups like Elvis Costello, the Police, B-52s, Everything But the Girl, Eurythmics. These groups were a little bit, softer edge. Those are their words. And the music got a little bit harder or more guitar driven as the day went on. So really after 7 o'clock, you could hear my kind of music that was more guitar driven music. Also in 1983, they applied for their permit to make 100,000 watts, to build a tower to accommodate 100,000 watt signal. That was in 1983. That was also the first attempt by GPB to make a play for the station in 1983.
Wow, it was that early. My goodness.
It was that early, yeah. And Jeff Walker went to the Board of Regents to fight because GPB was saying, look, 100,000 watts, that's a lot of power for college students. I don't think they can handle it. We should be doing it. And the research does show that as well. But he was able, back in the day, you could go meet with the Board of Regents. And he did. And he basically said, look, we have done everything we can to uphold the FCC license and be respectful and honor everything that we were supposed to do. So there's no issue with us breaking any type of or creating any violations. Also, in the 80s, once the tower did come up in 1987, in March of 87, that once again made the station a very valuable property. Once again, it was on par with commercial stations in Atlanta, and it was the most powerful student-run college radio station in the United States, right? Just think of that. The most powerful student-run college station in the U.S.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of other college stations with 100,000 watts, right? That's rare.
And they were already coming from a 20,000 watt signal, so that was pretty powerful to begin with.
I mean, there are maybe only a handful of 100,000 watt signals in the entire in Atlanta, period, right? FM dial. There's only like 6 or 7.
Right, yeah. But that once again, that college radio industry, they were selling records. I mean, the record labels just threw stuff at them. I mean,
oh yeah, what were the biggest acts at the time, the late 80s, that they were actually breaking at the time? Into the early
and
90s.
REM, which was coming up in the early 80s. I spoke to Mike Mills, a guitarist of REM, who said basically the rise of college radio was also the rise of REM.
Right.
And even Rolling Stone says they were the penultimate college rock band of the 80s.
Yeah.
REM. And that first record, Radio Free Europe, was played on RAS as a cassette or a single, 40 Hibtone, which are actually re-releasing, they announced this week. Just all these iconic groups, I mean, of college alternative music were popping in the 80s. I mean, And once again, this is my kind of music because that was my decade as well. The
Well,
1980s.
into the 90s, their influence actually impacted a what was a top 40 station over in 99, right?
Right,
99.7, and they ended up in 92, October 92, becoming 99X. So they basically semi-swiped some of RAS's
Yeah, so
music.
99X, once again, we saw it with KLS flipping their format. 99X Power 99 was basically
Power
just
99.
kind of 96 rock light. I'm not from Atlanta, so I wasn't listening to it. But yeah,
It was a top 40
99X,
station. It was just a straight top 40 station in 92. That's all
exactly.
It was.
So they
Paula
just flipped
Abdul,
they
Color Me
flipped their
Bad, all
format.
that stuff. Yeah.
They flipped their format to be what modern alternative. They had RAS people working there. One of the alums told me she went into a room with some programmers and they said, "What do you think about this new REM record? Should we be playing it?" And she's like, "Yeah, you should." And they were the first kind of commercial station to play whatever record, I think it was whatever record came up in 92. And it was all rather mysterious overnight. They just flipped the format and, it just,
Yeah,
all of a sudden.
that's a whole separate story. I'm very familiar
Exactly.
with it.
So
But how did that impact, ultimately, how did that impact RES through the 90s as 99X kind of took the commercial helm of alt rock? What did RES do during the 90s into the 2000s?
Well, RAS, once again, deeper cuts, stay away from the hits. And in the record industry, they knew and they responded that, look, you break the hits. Once they get on commercial radio, find the second hit, the third hit, and play those. That way the life of the album can be extended. And the 90s had Smashing Pumpkins, the Pixies, Red Hot Chili. I mean, this is another big decade for alternative music. But also, you're seeing the rise of hip hop and rap and urban music.
Yeah, they started diversifying. RAS started diversifying, and we'll talk about that later. What happened in the 2000s as we were just getting early streaming and downloading, and the internet was starting to take over? How did that impact RAS into the 2000s?
Well, I think as college radio saw a lot of this internet streaming and iPods, just giving somebody 10,000 songs on a digital player, you kind of saw students becoming less interested. Not 100%, but just as a national trend in college radio, that you saw students less interested in being a DJ because I got 1,000 songs in my iPod.
I'm my own DJ.
Exactly. So, the 2000s they had RAS Fest, which was a concert that they did every year, featuring up and coming bands or the Atlanta bands. You also had more specialty programs and things like this. So by the time we got to 2010. It was pretty much, college radio, whether you want to call it on the declines, radio is certainly not dead. But college radio, maybe it's less relevant today than it was in the 80s, 90s.
And maybe that's why there was no Jeff Clark in 2014, and GPB, still seeking a big signal, came in and I guess borrowed some of the time, right? I don't know what you call it exactly.
Well, I call it the agreement, the 2014 agreement. Yeah.
Yes. In 2014.
And so that happened in May of 2014, where GPB and GSU came to an agreement involving the airtime. I know we'll talk about that
70
later.
hours a week. Yeah. 70 hours a week on GPB. And I guess the evening times were still left on the FM dial, but the kids kept on running, I guess, an online operation during the day, right through until now, right? Still going.
There's a streaming, there's HD signals, high definition signals, which I'm a big fan of. They're not as, you get them in cars, newer cars. You can buy portable radios with HD signals, and then there's a streaming internet feed. But this is also, there was a big morale hit at the station because the students, we need to be careful not to say kids all the time. They're students.
I'm sorry.
I know, because I'm a kid. I mean, I'm a student. I'm a kid. I don't know. That the students it was like a bomb had been dropped on them, and just the morale suffered, and even the industry was like, you're not doing as much as you used to do. So tickets, ticket giveaways declined because clubs were like, you're not on the air in morning drive and noon programming and afternoon drive. So some of that did fall by the wayside because of that.
All right, Andreas, we're going to rewind the clock. We're going to talk to the panel now about each, going back decades wise. So thank you for the overview. Let's talk about the 70s. Do any of you have memories of the station from those days? Do tell. And any of the panelists, go right ahead.
Well, I'll just quickly, this picture we're looking at here, Bob Geldof. This is a picture. I mean, this is, when I do college radio industry, it's like you can impact the local scene, the national. Here is a freaking international impact of WRS. Just quickly to reference this photo, Bob Geldof and Johnny Fingers, who's in his trademark pajamas in the middle of the day, they came to the station in '78 where, they were doing an interview and the telex machine ticked off the shooting. It was a female shooter that basically shot up a school. And when they asked her, why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? And she said, I don't like Mondays. It was because of that moment they were at the station that they got the inspiration for one of the most iconic new wave hits of the '70s of forever.
Oh, I adore that song. Yeah.
Yeah, this photo was taken a year later. So they went back to the station when they were on tour in '79 in Atlanta, and they went back. Cleedra White is a music director on the left. A very interesting story. She is an African-American music director, which was kind of, an outlier, so to speak. Interesting. And then, they came back and staged this photo holding the wire just to have, some record of it. And interestingly, Cleedra told me that Johnny Fingers recently contacted her within the last couple of years because he did not get songwriting credit from Sir Bob. And there's a lot of money because that's one of their most popular hits. So Cleedra was able to facilitate proving that Johnny Fingers, the piano player, was there and was also part of the song's inspiration. So he's now gotten songwriting credits. That's an interesting tale from the '70s.
Oh, Chad, can you tell us a little bit about the origins of college radio itself and how, where did, Album 88, where did they fall in the pantheon of college radio?
Well, my knowledge is, I think it's pretty general. I think that the college radio stations kind of became the institution that they are starting in the '60s. I think the FCC was handing out these like 10,000 or like 10,000 watt like Class D licenses, I think they were called. Andreas might be able to speak to that a little more, but I think that they, around the country started popping up and functioning a lot like weekly newspapers or something like that. It was an outlet that had a specific community reach, and because of that, it was a little more dialed into what was happening on the ground level, on like a grassroots level, more so than the evening news or whatever you were getting elsewhere from a more mainstream signal. But that was the era of, we're still talking about, the Vietnam War was still going on, the draft was going on. It was still, it was the Cold War era. So on college campuses, there was a lot of sentiment against everything that was happening and everything that they were learning about, I think, in more mainstream news outlets. And this was a place where they could sort of unleash some unrestrained thought and creativity and things like that. And, I was born in 1975. And I grew up in Omaha or around Omaha, like across the river. And there were college radio stations there, but they were like classical music stations and things like that. And when I went to the University of Iowa to start studying journalism, I remember there was KRUI. And, I was a broke college kid. And I just remember being able to get tickets to any of the shows. I could hear interviews. Like if a band was in town that night, they would always stop at the radio station and do an interview. And that always, I think, kind of fostered for me, like just like feeling like I was a part of this town's music scene or this kind of community around what's going on. It's, it was kind of like the same thing as going to a record store. And, there was a human interaction, and you could be exposed to songs or artists that maybe you didn't already know. And somebody else could look at you and say, he's wearing a Tortoise t-shirt, I bet he likes this, something like that. So when I moved to Atlanta around '99, I remember listening to an interview with the Rocketeens, on WRAS. And I didn't know they were an Atlanta band. And so that kind of opened up a whole world for me. So when I started going out to shows and meeting people who were DJs or had their own shows, it really helped, I think, foster a community in Atlanta that was pretty distinct, and it kind of existed in its own lane. That was sort of my experience with 88.5.
Andreas, what were some artists that visited the station in its first, 15, 20 years that were kind of notable visits?
Well,
besides the one you mentioned already.
The Bob Geldof is one of the most
Yeah,
famous.
that's
Alice
a classic.
Cooper,
That is
Alice
indeed.
Cooper, Dale Bennett, who was the first DJ who signed on in 1971, said he had a horrible fear of snakes. Guess what? Alice travels with a snake. He showed up with a snake in the control room, also drinking Budweiser. There's some famous pictures of him in the control room, once again in the middle of the day. Elvis Costello was a regular who did guest DJ shifts. Here you see him in the 80s surrounded by some WRAS staffers.
That is awesome.
And he was, he came a lot, and he likes it. He's come to Atlanta many, many, many times. You've got, one of the interesting stories that the alums told me in the 70s, yes, Roundabout, the song Roundabout, because WRAS played it so much, the record label gave them the gold single of Roundabout, which is, another classic song in the classic rock pantheon, but they played it so much that, the record industry recognized them as breaking the song in the Atlanta market. And then basically.
Do the radio offices still have a lot of those gold records hanging on the walls? Are they still?
There's some, but the Yes album has mysteriously disappeared. Yes.
It's off eBay.
It's either sitting in somebody's basement or something like that. But just really anybody who's anybody came to the station because, once again, nobody was playing this music. And to sell the records and expose the artists, the record labels made WRAS priority for these folks to visit the station.
And this is a public call that it's not too late to give that record back.
I guess the offices weren't that secure in that sense. It was very easy to run off with something off the wall pretty easily. So, let's jump into the late 80s, since that's where Fiona, you and Talib straddled that time frame. Can you each of you talk about your time at the station?
I'll go first. Can you guys hear me? Is my video working? Do you guys see me? I don't even.
Yes.
You do.
I see you.
Hi. Yeah, I emigrated from London, England, and went to Georgia State University. I had the most fun in my life at Georgia State and WRAS. I made some incredible friends there. I know we talked about Jeff Clark, Say, Delia Ray, Kim Turner, Caroline Murray, rest in peace. She passed away not that long ago. Of course, Talib Shabazz. Some incredible relationships, and discovered so many amazing artists. I mean, artists like Ministry, Tackhead, Cold Cut, Follow for Now, The Blue Nile, Skinny Puppy, Mauve, Pop Will Eat Itself, Texas, That Petrol Emotion, REM, Simple Minds, who I'm actually working with now, representing them still, and Gary Newman. The list just goes on and on and on.
But Fiona, why did you decide to first of all go to GSU at the time, and what made you even enter the radio station? What was kind of your memories, your first visit?
Great question. So as I mentioned, my parents had moved to Georgia State. Had moved to Atlanta from London. I had come to America as a concert pianist and violinist. So I had previous scholarships at Philadelphia College of Performing Arts and University of Maryland. When I realized that I wasn't going to make it in long classical gowns and playing Scriabin and Rachmaninoff, I decided to come to Atlanta with my parents. I was 22 at the time. And I decided, okay, what am I going to study here, since I've been taking music and theater my whole life? What am I going to do now? And I went literally down the list of degrees and picked speech communications, because I figured I have the gift of gab. I think I can handle this. I studied speech communications with a broadcast degree was my minor, broadcast journalism. And of course, being that I was studying broadcast journalism, obviously I would write for the Signal here and there. And, there was a cable TV, but huge radio station, 100,000 watts. That really appealed to me. But what really was sort of the icing on the cake was they had a Best of Britain show. And I'll never forget it. I had a seriously thick English accent at the time. I'm sure Talib will remember this. Very thick English accent. I'm listening to Best of Britain and I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute, hang on a mo. I don't hear any English accents on this program. And talking about punk rock and all the bands that I grew up with. But yeah, what's up with that? So I came straight into the station, saw that it was Eric Sessions and Rob Nicholson. I literally bum rushed the show, got them to give me a guest spot, which they initially were a little apprehensive, but then thought, you know what, she's got the accent. Why not? Might be good for the airways. We'll get the phones ringing. Sure enough, the phones went bananas. And next thing you know, I talked my way into getting graveyard shifts, fill-ins, and they wouldn't give me my own show yet. But they gave me the news. I would read the news because they thought, well, you know, she'll sound BBC, you know. So I started out reading the news and I was desperate to have a show or desperate to do all the cool things over there. But after reading the news for 3-4 months, then got in and had my own show, All That Jazz, which was a great weekly jazz show. And then would also do afternoons from time to time as well. But I had some amazing experiences there, you know, got free tickets to all the shows. So I was constantly at the Roxy, constantly at Cotton Club, at the Masquerade, at, you know, the Point, and saw amazing bands, everything from local bands like Follow for Now, Holly Faith, you know, to Athens bands like REM and the B-52s, to Vic Chestnut, to national touring bands and international touring bands like Simple Minds. I saw Nirvana for one of their first shows at Masquerade, and yeah, and the rest is history. I'm still doing it. I'm in the music industry, not in radio, but I'm now doing promotion, working to radio stations, you know, promoting records to press and the media. So haven't looked back.
Wonderful. Talib, are you there? Do we have Talib at the moment? I know he's been wandering
I'm here.
around. Oh,
I'm
wonderful.
here.
Well,
Sorry,
well, tell us a little bit about how you got involved. You know, first of all, how did you get to JSU in the first place, and why did you decide to step into the studios and contribute?
Yeah, it's funny. I got into Georgia State after graduating high school and realizing that going to DeVry, becoming an electrical engineer, wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I came to Georgia State and found out that Georgia State had a school called, a major called Commercial Music and Recording. And I didn't want to go to Art Institute or any of the other schools that were doing it. I figured that this would be a good opportunity for me to try my hand at, you know, getting into the music industry. It's funny because, but how I got to Georgia State was I was originally doing record promotions. Actually, I started doing publishing. I was writing jingles in New York, and I started a publishing company. Got with some guys that wanted to put out a rap record here in Atlanta, but they didn't have a publisher. So I did the publishing for them. And I quickly found that publishing means nothing if you weren't getting any promotions. So I wound up promoting the record. Started looking in the back of magazines like the CMJ and Cashbox and the Source magazine, and saw that Georgia State was a reporter. They would you know, tell these magazines everything that they had played the week before. So I started talking to Randall Moore, who was the host at the time, and you know, trying to work my single. And a couple of months later, Randall and I were talking, and he said that he was going to have to find a co-host because Walter Phillips, who was doing the show at the time, was graduating. And I said, well, I'm a state student. And he was like, really? Would you be interested in doing the show? I was like, yeah. And so you know, he helped me secure some graveyard shifts and fill-ins. And, you know, 3 months later, I was actually on the air as a co-host for the Rhythm and Vibe show.
That is so awesome. Did you feel, I mean, as a black man at the station, at the time, were there a lot of other minorities at the station, or?
No, heck no, man. It was like four of us. It was a guy by the name of Curtis Augustin who had taken over the Caribbean Shakedown show on Tuesday nights. It was myself and Walt, and I think Cecily was there at that point, maybe Crystal. So yeah, maybe five of us.
Let's not forget Will G from Chocolate Soul.
Yeah, Will came later.
Oh, he came later. Yeah.
What was the culture of the station like at the time? What's your memories of just being with just hanging out?
It's funny because as we were, doing the interview for Andreas with and the 50th anniversary, I realized that there was a lot of the politics that were going on at the station that were kind of shielded from me. Randall really took the brunt of a lot of the aggression towards our show. So it was, it was, So I had a lot of fun. I did have, there was some times where it was like, oh man, okay, what are they coming down on us this time for? But, fortunately, a lot of the hostility that some of my counterparts encountered later, really, I didn't have those problems.
Yeah, quickly, Andreas. You want to jump in on this?
In my research, and I spoke to Talib, and he gave me some great background. I saw somebody ask about Rhythm and Vibes. Rhythm and Vibes started in 1989 by Hank Ernest, who was doing Infinite Vibes, which was a jazz show in the 80s. And when he pitched Rhythm and Vibes, he got pushback from the GM. And it got kind of, contentious. He told me he went to the president of Georgia State and they said, figure it out. And he got the show and everything was copacetic. But you also had in Georgia State in 1992 sit-ins. So, a lot of students were beginning to challenge African-American students, which were still under 10% of the student population at Georgia State. Remember, this is a commuter campus. There were no dormitories. The student body was older. This is not a big leafy campus. It's a downtown campus. So you have to always understand Georgia State is just a different campus than UGA or, Vanderbilt or Tulane, where I was connected to. And you saw that they had sit-ins in 1992 that actually closed the school for 4 days. By the mid-90s, things got very contentious. Once again, this is all research that I've done through the Georgia State Signal. I was not there. But these are discussions I had with Talib that by the mid 90s, there was an article in the Georgia State Signal that says WRA is rocked by racism charges. And there were hostile work environment. People have told me about this, African-Americans and some of the white students. And by 1998, there was diversity training at the station. Remember, Georgia State is going through this process, as are a lot of college stations around the US. As rap and hip hop is coming up, look, I worked in the media, rap and hip hop had been vilified by the media, by politicians.
In the 90s, that was a very transitional time, you're right.
Yeah, violent music and the alternative kids, they didn't really know it. But people like Talib, and he mentioned Randall Moore, which was quite a presence at the station for almost 10 years. The Weekend Wrecking Crew, The Bomb, another program, Rhythm and Vibes. Many of these shows continued well into the 2000s. Then some rules came into effect that these folks thought they were being targeted because you couldn't have guests as much as you wanted. Guests could not use station equipment. They thought, they were being targeted because of their being African-American. Also, why are they on the weekend? Why are they, Weekend Wrecking Crew? The name came about because they would wreck your Monday morning because they were on.
What a great line. That's hilarious.
Talib Randall told me that they would be on from 10 p to 2 a.m. If you stayed for their entire show, your Monday morning was not pretty.
Well, see, and that's the funny thing too. A lot of times, even today, I still run into people who say that, they just got into the habit of hitting record and going to sleep. because they wanted to catch the show, but they had classes. I mean, we had at that time, especially the Rhythm and Vibe show. I mean, most of our listeners were in high school. We had a lot of high school students that tuned in every week. Georgia State students pretty much acted like we weren't even there. But the high school and some of the college students, yeah, they would be complaining that they couldn't make it to class.
Yeah,
It's
and
funny,
you
the
remember,
commercial. It's funny. The commercial station.
V103, their slogan was "We don't play rap," right?
Yeah, they resisted it for a long time.
Yeah,
I mean,
they said
V103
we don't play
resisted.
rap. So where else? I mean, Talib.
Yeah, it wasn't until Hot
It
97.1 came along in the mid '90s before that actually shifted. So
Right.
yeah, RAS was on the vanguard of playing any hip hop at all in Atlanta. Yeah, it's crazy how long it took the commercial stations to accept it.
Yeah.
WRFG played a lot of hip hop because I actually went over to WRFG after Star 94 and I played the heck out of hip hop. And it was really
Good for
because
you.
Talib and Randall inspired me so much to end up being like the hip hop chick out of the ATL. I mean, Talib, you probably remember this. We would compete with each other. Talib, you and I would compete about who breaks the record first. I broke that
Yes, I
Outcast
remember
album.
that. I
Doesn't
remember
play
that.
Aristocrat
I remember
Cadillac
that.
music, players ball. Anyway, I would like look up to you like that whole time when I had that jazz show. The minute I went over to RFG, it was a wrap.
Yeah. But
Oh.
yeah,
So
that,
Fiona, can you give us just a quick 1 minute contextual sense of what RFG is and what its relationship has been with RAS over the years?
Well, I mean, RFG is its own funny, interesting community over there. There's a lot of politics, a lot of red tape.
But it's an indie station, right? It's a completely independent, non-commercial
Absolutely.
station.
I mean, it's a public radio, 89.3 FM.
No affiliation with a college or anything.
No
yeah.
affiliation with nothing. It's public station, like Pacifica Public. And, back at the time when I was there, they had a show that was daily called RFG, called World Party. And it was mainly supposed to be everything from reggae to Caribbean vibes to African to, salsa, everything basically urban back then. But I would always break that trend by just playing hip hop. I had like a 4-hour shift of just playing hip hop. They would be so mad at me. My show got so popular. I was getting call-ins and audience from Clark Atlanta and Morehouse and Spelman and Georgia State. Like everybody was listening to my show. So, it was really, really, really popular. And other DJs at the time was Shaka Zulu. Luda had a show there. Little John was my DJ. Brian Calhoun, Brother Nature, was also one of the DJs on RFG. So it was starting to really grow into this whole like hip hop, like a lot of love. So every time, hip hop artists would come through the South, they'd always hit RAS Rhythm and Vibes, and then they'd hit RFG as well. We'd get tons of ticket giveaways and, and all kinds of stuff. So we really got, taken seriously and really came up on the dial. Even though it was 89.3, we was considered like one of the most reputable hip hop stations at the time, music. So
well, getting back to RAS, it is interesting. You mentioned this, Talib, that a lot of the listeners of RAS over the years were not students, that it actually had a wide following well outside the student body, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, when I got to the station, I was on campus a lot because of classes and just kind of hanging out, getting to know people. So I would talk to them, tell them that I'm on.
Oh, did we just lose him? Did we just lose Talib?
Looks like you froze.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, car technology. Well, tell me, Chad, we're getting into the time frame where you were starting to listen to RAS. I guess you mentioned late '99 into the early 2000s, right? That was kind of your time frame.
Right. Yeah, and just on the
and Bryce too, right? Yeah.
On the hip hop front, that having WRAS was kind of an excellent resource for me because coming here from the Midwest, I had a lot of people sort of putting in my ear like, you need to check out Outkast. You need to hear Outkast. It was kind of like Outkast was still sort of like a rising force. But I remember getting here and there was a group called the Micronauts that kind of had a stranglehold on the local scene at the time. And then it was through the Micronauts that I kind of learned about all these other groups and all these other little things that were happening in Atlanta's hip hop scene. And it really helped me kind of gain some perspective on what hip hop on the ground level in Atlanta was like versus the hip hop that was being broadcast out to the rest of the world. And that's where I discovered MF Doom. I remember hearing MF Doom. And
By the way, you just heard Fiona.
I
Fiona
signed the Micronauts out of Atlanta. I came down to Atlanta a lot. I was representing Gangstar. We did Freaknik. We did Jack the Rapper down there. But I signed the Micronauts out of Atlanta. I signed Science of Life, who moved down to Atlanta, and MF Doom. So
Yeah.
I was always looking
Wow.
towards Atlanta for the ATL hip hop scene. Yep.
right. Well, I remember hearing Obelisk Movement by Micronauts.
Mhm.
And just thinking like this is like some next level music that I have no perspective or no context. And I sort of shaped my whole perspective of Atlanta through learning about things like that, MF Doom, Micronauts, things like that. I was
Yeah.
always my personal tastes always gravitated more towards punk rock, experimental music, things like that. I learned, we haven't talked much about WREK today, but they also had 100,000 watts, and there was a lot of experimental music going on over there. But
the tech radio station, right?
right. But when early on, I discovered that show Dot Dash, which was WRAS's post-punk, alternative, new wave, goth, industrial, all that kind of stuff that you could fit under the post-punk category. And the thing that was super cool to me about it was when the semesters would change, the show would continue with different hosts, and the different hosts would always bring their own taste or their own kind of palette to it. And I remember early on listening to it and hearing a lot of kind of what you would consider to be like classic post-punk, like Wire, Mission of Burma, stuff like that. And later on, I remember hearing even more obscure stuff like Coil, and just kind of having this revelation of you couldn't go to New York City, you couldn't go to Los Angeles, you couldn't go to Chicago and turn on the radio during the prime time, 7 p.m. and hear some of the most like esoteric but influential music out there. And because of that, I formed relationships with some of the DJs. I brought some of them over to write for me at Creative Loafing from time to time. And Dot Dash was it really, I think that they were really onto something special for a long time. So.
All right, now we're getting into the world of Bryce, right? When did you first enter the station yourself, Bryce?
Well, I came to Atlanta in 2003 from Sydney, Nova Scotia in Canada, my hometown. And my only regret in terms of getting involved with Album 88 is that I didn't do it sooner. Came here in the fall 2003, but didn't get started until spring of 2005 as a DJ. And it was a rather tragic twist of fate that led me to my life course. I was a DJ for a long while. I was encouraged to apply for a management position, even though I really didn't want one because I wanted to focus on my grad studies. And I told myself I wouldn't go back to that cheese like I did in undergrad.
Yeah, what type of shifts did you do on the station? What were you doing?
I started with Graveyard, just like everyone else. I loved Graveyard, by the way. Graveyard to me was my life aspiration. It was so funny because the students would talk it up as though it was a great chore. Like, you're going to have to do Graveyard. You're going to have to do 2 to 6. And I was like, you're telling me what I've wanted to do all my life, which is to be on the radio late night with an actual audience. And I was so thrilled to do it. I then did regular rotation for a little bit. And I picked up co-hosting the Quintessential College Show for a while, which was a show founded by Mark Pravasi. And I applied for management, but I told the person interviewing me, Cassie Smith, if anybody not even better than me, but even less good than me, but still qualified applies, give it to them. Let's let some undergrads come in. And that was Bobby, who sadly, Robert Maria, I called him Bobby, who sadly passed away in 2006. He had cystic fibrosis. None of us knew except for a handful of people. I went home for the summer of 2006 and I, said a cheerful goodbye to him. He was our program director. And then he passed. And I came back and assumed the position of program director simply because I was kind of the runner-up. And that led me to becoming general manager the following year in 2007, 2008. And then when the vacancy for student media advisor came up, and I had completed my master's, so I was eligible to apply for it, I did, became advisor in 2008, and I've been in this role ever since, getting promoted in title a couple of times.
Well, congratulations. What did you like about the job? What has kept you there all these years?
What's interesting about Album 88 is that it's sort of like a little bit of the old Album 88 and a little bit of what I love about college radio. What's interesting is all these other people come from a world where Album 88's influence and almost becoming a station that was a commercial station in a college format appealed to them. I came from the other world, which was, I don't ever want to do radio for a living. I don't ever want to do music promotion for a living because I hate commercial radio. College radio is everything commercial radio isn't. That's what I want to be a part of. Album 88, by the time I got there, was sort of like a formatted, unformatted station where you had this rotation that featured rock music, electronic music, hip hop music, all in this big melting pot. And that appealed to me greatly. And the fact that you would bring students together that came from all of those scenes where they would all socialize together. The social environment at Album 88, and I'd been a part of a couple of other college radio stations that also had good social environments. And shout out to both Caper Radio and WMEB where I was before. But the social environment at Album 88 was unparalleled. And I thought if one day I could be the advisor to this station, that'd be pretty cool. And the opportunity presented itself. Certainly not the circumstances I would have envisioned. It happened in 2014 when I'm sure we're getting to.
Yeah, we're about to get to that right now. Yep.
Circumstances, sure. But it's interesting to note that when I got hired as student media advisor, actually the radio station was not added to my portfolio, which I'm very thankful for. It allowed me to learn the culture of all the other organizations.
Yeah, like the Signal and yeah.
Absolutely, which and I treasure my involvement with those organizations as well. But then in 2014, when I was promoted to assistant director, that's when Album 88 came under my purview.
My sense is that you had nothing to do with that, right? You were not at all involved with the talks. Yeah, I get the sense the talks were very high level, right, between GPB.
Oh, very much so, very much
GSU.
so, and so much so, in fact, that I literally did not find out until less than a day before the students did. I was informed about it, I want to say roughly about 12 to 14 hours before the students.
They gave you 12 hours notice out of respect for you, I guess. So there you go.
Well, probably so. And I get, and I don't want to speak for any of the people involved, but I think in many ways that, I don't want to say kept my hands clean, but I suppose in a way it did. And
yes.
I was called to a meeting on a Monday that I was under the impression was going to be how we were going to inform the students that I was going to be their new advisor. And it ended up being obviously something much larger than that.
Well, contextually in by 2014, obviously, for many years over on the NPR National Public Radio lands, Public Broadcasting Atlanta had the dominant station at 90.1. I think GPB has a bunch of stations all across the state, but they had no presence. They had a TV station, a very successful TV station, but not a radio station. And clearly Taya Ryan and the folks over there were hunting for a signal, much like they did back in the 80s, I guess. I heard that they sniffed around WREK, it went public, and of course the students went ballistic. So I think strategically they decided, let's do this very quietly and just get it done, and it looked like they did. They ultimately, blindsided the students, right? Tell us, I did some of the reporting, so did Chad at the time. What's your memories, Chad, of what happened and your reporting of what transpired?
I remember it was kind of a devastating thing that happened. Obviously nobody wanted to lose WRAS during the daytime, but it also it made people be the enemy of GPB and it generated all this negative sentiment towards GPB. And
yes, it did.
And like I had donated money to them, I wanted to support GPB, but they became the corporate overlords, and for what? So they could just duplicate NPR's same programming. And so trying to reach out to the folks like Bill Nigut and Taya Ryan and just kind of running into this Kafkaesque wall was really frustrating. And then getting a copy of the quote unquote agreement, as we've been calling it, and it was such somebody described it. I remember somebody described it as like a 24 armed octopus that every time you thought you found an escape route, it grabbed you and pulled you right back in. It was just this impenetrable contract. They thought of everything. And the fact that they kept it sort of low key until they pulled the trigger on it, it suggested that they knew that they were really, they were actively taking away from the culture of Atlanta.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, yeah, the students I interviewed, yeah, they were blindsided. They were having they had a hard time with the transition. And the alumni, what was interesting is just how passionate the alumni came out. You know, they formed their own little group to
Yes.
try and fight back. They looked at legal ways to try and stop it. And ultimately, it didn't work. Obviously, GPB held on for their
Right.
time. And
Yeah.
Album 88 just had to adjust to this new world. And Bryce, how did you guys manage to make it, keep students coming in, not get demoralized, to try and encourage them that this is still a viable media operation for students?
Well, it's interesting because it certainly was challenging, not going to lie. And as someone who came not from the city of Atlanta, nor from a blowtorch college radio station, if you could have told me when I was transferring, let's say, from the University of Maine, and I would have been airdropped into Album 88 in 2015 after the GPB agreement, I would have said, interesting. In the nighttime, you're out there, to a major city on a blowtorch station, and you have a sub channel. Like this is far more powerful than the college radio station I just came from. Or
Relatively speaking, yeah, it's all relative, right?
Everything
Yeah,
is
they
relative,
got
right?
spoiled in some ways, yes.
And so I think that one of the things that made the agreement such a culture shock was how long Album 88 had operated without any such agreement. And
No.
the longer you get used to something, I think the more difficult it is to live without it. And so as far as the morale of the students, in more recent years, it's not as observable because
Yes.
those students didn't really grow up with that Album 88. So right now, we don't have the big staff that we used to have, but that's gradually starting to change. Our last application period, I think, was the biggest window we had in 3 years, because they don't necessarily think of it as compared to the past. But
Sure.
I'm not going to lie. I'm definitely going to tell you that the first few years, the downturn was noticeable.
Yeah, and overall, look, the whole world of radio has shifted. We've gone to Spotify. People are listening to their own, playlists and on demand now. So where does that leave radio? Period. Where's the future there exactly?
I think it's trying to find a captive audience, and I think that was one of the things that I understood the students to be very upset about when it originally happened, which is that you don't need radio to reach a worldwide audience, but radio sure helps you find a captive audience. When someone is in their car and they turn on the radio, their options are limited and they can only find so many stations. The moment you enter the internet, you're in this enormous, vast spectrum where you're competing against everything. What I think radio is trying to do now is find quicker ways to grab people's attention when they do have the car radio on. I don't have the statistics, and I'm sure some of the other people can talk about this in their reporting, about how long people listen to the radio now when they do listen to it. But the idea is now that when you're programming a station, you grab people by the throat. This is not like a slow sipping beverage. This is a quick sip beverage now. And how do you get people's attention?
Right. Gotcha. Well, thank you, everybody on the panel. We're going to take some questions now from the chat world here. And I see one from Martin Kelly about rhythm and vibes. What is your opinion of which artist was actually broken as a result of early buy-in or exposure from the show? And has been discussed, RES was an extremely powerful college radio station. I just wonder if some artists may not have happened without Album 88.
That's a good question. The thing for us in the Rhythm and Vibe show was we really tried to give as much of the spectrum as possible. And Randall and I played songs that, under normal circumstances probably wouldn't make our personal playlists. But I remember being one of the first people to play Cash Money. So the Lil Wayne, Juvenile, the whole New Orleans crew, Nobody I knew was playing that record before we went on it, or their music before we went on it. Outkast was definitely one. I know Fiona says she broke the Outkast, but we
I
did.
did. I'm on the album. Special thanks. I've got my
Of
name
course
on
you
there.
are.
Special thanks.
And you know why? You know why? It's because I was doing the promotions.
All right. And you know, they played my
We
goodbye
had to-
party. You know, they
so
did
we
my
had
goodbye
to-
party too. So, you know, that was
Yes,
great. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
you know, but that was the thing. You know, there were. It got to a point where I'm not going to say that, you know, we created the Atlanta scene, because there were people who were already doing this kind of music before we came on the air. However, in terms of, you know, really making a push for the local scene, you know, not just, you know, we're not just trying to play national acts. We really want to have, you know, our own people come up and do stuff. You know, I want to say that everybody benefited from that, you know, because now it was a be proud that we have our own kind of thing, as opposed to, you know, yeah, Arrested Development made it, but who else, you know? But I will, you know, and that's the thing too. So I also want to say that I really feel that although RES may not have, you know, been this group's one shot at getting out there, it was through our network that, you know, we were able to start to really do things with groups, because, you know, at one point, I think about 1995, 96, we started what we called the Radio Coalition, which was the Rhythm and Vibe show, Will G show, the Urban Flavor, and the Caribbean Shakedown show from RES. We had quite a few of the DJs from WRFG, REK, and even some of the mix show guys, mix show DJs from, you know, from V and Hot. Well, excuse me, Hot wasn't here at that point, but the mix show guys from V103, and we all would meet every week trying to make, you know, the whole scene bigger. You know what I mean? And that's one thing that I would say is I can't really pinpoint a group that said they wouldn't have made it without RES and without the Rhythm and Vibe show, but the scene as a whole, yeah, we definitely led the way for people to want better. If that makes sense.
Oh, that's excellent. Somebody I had a question for you, Fiona. What was it like to be a woman at the station at the time you were there?
I did just want to shout out. Yeah, no, sorry.
Yes.
I wanted to shout out Talib
Oh,
real quick,
please.
because I looked after Gangstar when I moved to New York. I worked at EMI Chrysalis, and Gangstar Guru used to love coming out of Atlanta. He loved his honeys.
Oh yeah.
He loved his honeys. Next girl to ex girl. The girls look so good. Next. Anyway, he used to tell me in New York that he loved the Rhythm and Vibe show, that was one of his favorite ATL shows, or just radio shows in general. He used to say he had so much fun doing ATL.
Yeah. And he was always, you know, unfortunate. I mean, there were groups like that really, you know, wanted to help us out and wanted to do things for us, you know, and that's what really made the biggest impact on me, was because now it's like, okay, it's not just, you know, I'm playing your record. It's, hey man, you guys need a drop. You know, can we do an interview? Can I bring something else that I'm working? You know, some other groups that I'm working with, can I bring them through? And then it becomes really a symbiote type of relationship, you know, where the artist helps the DJ and the DJ helps the artist, and we're both, you know, kind of in this together.
Sorry, Rodney. Yeah, the question about being a female, being a woman. Yeah. So, you know, it's funny because I immediately made amazing friends. And as I'd mentioned earlier on the Zoom, you know, Delia Ray, who went on to have a really successful career in radio, Kelly Richardson, you know, Kim Sade, who's amazing, Valerie, Patty Hausman. We all became pretty fast and furious friends. But I think the one thing I did think, because there were a lot of women, you know, when I was there during that era, end of 80s, early 90s, there were a lot of women, a lot of DJs, a lot of women DJs, quite a
That's
few. I
great.
mean, I didn't recognize that there were, more men than women, or, we're not getting as many opportunities, or we're not getting free tickets, or we're not doing, we're not getting the interviews. I never, and I don't want to say me because I had the jazz show, but just watching my other peers, my other fellow women DJs, I never saw them complain or say they're not getting the opportunities that their male counterparts were. But I will say this, I rose up pretty quick. And I think it was because of the British accent. It helped a lot. I mean, if you hear me now, nothing like it was. I mean, it was really super, super thick. And like I said, reading the news with a BBC accent, which is NPR equivalent, people did start to get a bit jealous of me per se. And, people would always imitate the way I'd say, you're listening to WRAS 88.5, Georgia State University. And I'm Fiona Bloom from the Album 88 newscast. And they would be like, newscast. And I'd hear them laugh at me a little bit here and there, but it wasn't laughing like, oh, she sucks kind of thing. It was more like, yeah, she's really bloody good and she's popular and people enjoy her and she's got a great personality and very bubbly. And she's rocking the airwaves right now, and some of us aren't, kind of thing. But listen, I hustled, I worked hard, I was always trying to, do whatever I could around the station. And I learned a lot, and like I said, I wouldn't.
Look, I can sense your energy. I can sense your energy now. I can't even imagine what it was like in the early 90s. This is how much energy you convey today.
Oh,
it was crazy. It was crazy.
The joke was I had a great face for radio. No, I had a great voice for radio. No, but the thing is, I enjoyed it so much. I probably would have had a successful career in commercial radio had it not have been me being lured to New York to work as an incredibly amazing opportunity as a national marketing director for Chrysalis EMI Records. I would never have left Atlanta, to be quite honest with you. And I missed Atlanta. I missed, it like crazy, and I miss radio like crazy.
As we know, radio today is not the same as radio in 1991. So it's just life moves on, unfortunately.
Yes.
We have a question for Bryce. How have media programs at GSU changed since 2014? Are students still graduating GSU programs and heading to the music industry? Are there still people entering the music biz from GSU?
That's actually two questions. The short answer to the first part is that the media related opportunities for students have expanded rapidly since I've come here.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, with Hollywood coming here too. I mean, there's a lot of more opportunities.
Absolutely.
In the entertainment business.
Never could have conceived of that when I moved here in 2003. And very briefly, what's interesting is when I moved here, I didn't one of the things that Atlanta is starting to learn how to do as a city is promote itself better. I didn't realize how influential Atlanta was on pop culture until I moved here. The slogan AIE, Atlanta influences everything. That wasn't really a thing then, but it should have been. For example, there was this really popular web cartoon, Homestar Runner. I'm sure some people here would remember it. And man, all my friends in my hometown loved Homestar Runner. Loved it. Didn't have a concept or a clue that this was Atlanta related at all. Moved here and it's like, oh gosh, like here's this cool thing. So one of the upshots of the whole agreement between GPB and GSU was the development of GSU TV. So that's something that a lot of students have pursued, but we're very separate from that. In terms of students volunteering to want careers in music, yes and no. It's more careers in art in general. One of the GMs—
Meaning what type of art? When you say art,
it could range from radio to other things. So Hannah, who was a GM that I advised, she's doing the music promotions type job that Fiona graduated to do and so on. She works with Baby Robot, but then you have someone like Elena Fabricius, who was my first GM.
I remember Elena Fabricius.
I bet, yeah, absolutely. And she works for Danger Press, which is a shirt printing company in Atlanta, along with Jason Mueller, another part of the station, because she had such an interest in just, and shirts in a way are art. She had an interest in screen printing and things like that. And then there were students who were reading the news. It's interesting. Emma Lacey Bordeaux was the news director the year I was GM. It was her second year as news director. And now I don't even know what her job title at CNN is now. I think as Andreas once said, she's going to run the place one day. She's super high up. John Asante, who was the follow-up news director, ended up working in a couple of public radio jobs until he moved to LA to do Stitcher and now works for Pineapple Media. So it runs the gamut, but I think it's a little more diversified now. I think college radio used to be, I want a career working with bands or in music promotion. I'm going to get involved in college radio. And a handful of people will be like, I'll get training. I'll work in commercial radio. Now it runs the gamut. I'll be in promotions. I'll be in actual radio. I'll do a podcast. I'll end up, being a producer, etc. So the opportunities are still there. They're a little more diversified.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah, there are more opportunities effectively out there. The diversity of media options is vastly greater than it was even 15, 20 years ago, and the types of things you could do and the types of skills you could use in this day and age. So that makes sense. And the quality of the students over the years, I mean, as GSU has gotten bigger, I mean, how have things changed among the students themselves and the makeup of the students who are active with Alpha Media?
You know, it's interesting that so many universities want to talk about diversity. GSU, for whatever criticisms people might have of GSU, and I don't think anyone would not have some criticism of any institution. When it comes to diversity now, it walks the walk a lot more than most universities in the country. It really is a diverse population. And I think Alba Mediate reflects that because in terms of having both men and women volunteer for the station, having students of a variety of ethnicities volunteer for the station, having students with different gender identifications volunteering for the station, that runs the gamut. I'll tell you right now, I advise 5 leaders. Right now, one is a gender fluid student. I have two black male students. I have one mixed race male student, and I have one Hispanic woman that runs the literary journal. And none of this was done through diversity initiatives. And I'm not knocking them. I don't want anyone to think that that's what I'm doing, but it happened organically. And gosh, I want that to just be the way that the rest of the country and the rest of the world works. And not just Alba Mediate, but student media as a whole. And I'm not taking any credit for that. I think I'm just happy that it's happened. And I think that that's something that you'll see more of moving forward.
Well, that's great. Well, we're about to wrap. It's, we're at hour 20 at this point. I'd love to just get a few final thoughts on what RAS means to you, each individual panelist here, and we can move on with the rest of the day. So let's start with Andreas, since we started with you in the first place.
Thank you. It's been great participating in this panel. You know, what I really find amazing is that, once you put the station in perspective, and I do this, and I think it's important to do that, these are young people in their late teens and early 20s, some facing tremendous odds against them, which we mentioned, others going through kind of radical changes in diversity that the university is going through as well, that these are young folks, but really at the end of the day, it's the social connection that brings the like-minded people together. Whether it was whether you can call college radio is typically the stereotype as the outsider, the punk kid, the new wave kid. Well, there was also fraternity, sorority people involved at Georgia State, but they all binded on the music. Somebody described this as a fraternity of music lovers. And I think that is the most important thing to capture in college radio. It is the culture of college radio. For a lot of folks, this is the best times of their life. And I think that's important to recognize and also to celebrate. And I'm glad we're having this discussion about WRAS.
And well, thank you so much, Andreas. And hopefully your work will be placed in some place where people can read it when it's ready. Chad, as an outsider, but what's kind of your feelings now about RAS?
Well, I still listen to the stream on my computer when I'm working during the day. I'll just tune it in and let it play while I'm just kind of doing my thing. But I think just to echo what Andreas said is that it's important to remember that these are young people who are facing some pretty severe odds against them, and if they are actively playing a hands-on role in college radio in the year 2021, then you know that this is something they take very seriously. It's a vocation for them, and you need to listen to what they have to say and just kind of be aware of what they're doing. As somebody who's I like to say that I have an insatiable taste for new music, but one thing the pandemic kind of proved is that in isolation I'm surrounded by records. And I know what my tastes are, so I've been listening to records constantly. But if I tune into WRAS, I hear new stuff. I hear stuff that I wouldn't normally find on my own. And again, like going to a record store, that interaction with another human being, I think, is invaluable right now.
Thank you so much, Chad. How about you, Fiona, up in New York?
Yeah, really echoing what everyone, Andreas and Chad have said so far, but I'm really, really proud to have gotten my start at WRAS and college radio. And still to this day, in everything that I do, I always go back and talk about, how essential and important college radio is to building relationships, to navigating around the, music scene and media in general. And, with the college background, it's given me sort of the, the push and the drive to explore all these other mediums as well, because knowing that it sort of begins with, in my opinion, it begins with college radio, and college radio, is going to be here till the end. It's never, ever going to go away because it's university and colleges, it's public radio, it's community radio. It's really what everything is. And I've always been that my whole life about, it's really shaped who I am as an individual, as a human being, because again, if it wasn't college radio and looking at college radio around the world, and especially in the US, it's you understand culture better, you understand what community is, and you develop some of the best friendships in the world. And I've been really thankful and fortunate to have stayed in touch, like I said, with most of those college DJs and programming people that I came up with are still very much friends of mine today. And most importantly is the fact that here I am still in the music industry 35 years later and have an incredible knowledge and drive and starving still for music to this day that I had from when I started at college radio, the knowledge that I had from those days and the diverse variety of music you can see now to what I do with the Bloom Effect is, a plethora of all kinds of styles of music. And honestly, if it wasn't for being in college radio, I wouldn't have been able to, weave in and out of all these different genres so effortlessly. So I love it. And thank you so much for this incredible panel and having me share my stories with you.
Thank you so much for your enthusiasm and passion. It's nobody can match it. And Talib, how about you? What how did it change? Ultimately, how did this change your life? How did RAS ultimately shape who you are today?
Wow, man, I'm so grateful that there was WRAS, that there was a WRAS there for me to be a part of. As a 21-year-old who, just had a son, and going back to school, it was a labor of love. But I'm so glad that the opportunity was there so that I could show people who didn't necessarily have the background that I did, what this music could be. It's funny because, although I'm known for the rap show, I was very much a New York punk kid, you know what I mean? So, punk and hip hop kind of had its roots in the same places,
right?
In New York City at the time. And for me, it was me express how it, or what it meant for me to be able to present, not just hip hop music, but music in general to people who didn't necessarily knew the same things that I knew about music. And, being able to convert fans, being able to, show people that there was something else and that this music is viable doing it. I mean, there's nothing better. There's nothing better.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Talib, for help contributing to this panel. And, we loved your insight. Thank you.
I appreciate y'all.
And
Ronnie, I'm still, articles and stuff too, bro. I just want to give you a shout as well,
Awesome. All right, and Bryce, you guys kind of get the final word since you're still there and you're still fighting the good fight at GSU. What's the best selling point for you about RAS even in 2021, 50 years later?
Well, I'll move specific to broaden back to specific. First, I want to, everybody that's enjoyed this panel, you can listen every Wednesday to 8850, 7 to 9 p.m. on 88.5 FM. That's Andreas's show, and it's very much a history show. So if you've been enjoying all this, you'll get that every week, 7 to 9 Wednesday on 88.5 FM. The students are online 24/7 on Album 88's web stream at wras.org and on 88.5 FM HD2. And of course, 7 to 5 every night on 88.5 FM. College radio broadly saved my life. I know that sounds grandiose, but I think it's true. Most of the important social connections I've made in my life are because of college radio, and specifically Album 88 really instilled a love of Atlanta to me. I've said this at national conventions and regional conventions that, you know, Canada is my country, Cape Breton is my home, but Atlanta is my city. And I think being involved with Album 88 really helped to underscore that. And I'm eternally grateful that I had the opportunity to be involved as a student, and I'm eternally grateful that I've gotten the chance to be their advisor. It's, I think, wonderful things in the past and wonderful things moving forward.
Much appreciated, Bryce.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. What a great panel with so many stories. I really feel like there's still 100 more stories that we could all talk about, especially about the artists. We only dipped our toe this far into talking about the artists that had stopped by the station and stuff. But thank you, each of you. Thanks, Rodney Ho, especially our great moderator today from the AJC, who is also a board member of the Press Club. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Fiona and Talib and Chad and Bryce and Andreas. Thank you. Yeah, he's got his Album 88 visual up there. Yeah. So definitely tune in to Album 88 to hear more about this topic on the history, the 50 years of the station, 7 to 9 p.m. on Wednesdays. And the great thing that one of the things that I got to do when we were preparing for this event is also go to the web and just look at GSU's, Georgia State University archives. You'll be able to find a lot of great pictures and a lot of great information. Not only do they have the history of WRAS, you can dig around and find out about that, but also just the history of radio in Georgia is located on the Georgia State University archive website. So please check that out. And of course, this was a presentation by the Atlanta Press Club. So thank you for being here. Visit us at atlantapressclub.org for more information about our upcoming events, or to donate, or to become a member. We hope to see you all soon. And thank you again for joining us today. This will be available on YouTube later for viewing. Take care, everybody. Thanks again. Great panelists.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.